An 8-year-old girl gives her only $5 to a lonely man who's really a rich businessman planning to tear down her home. Stay with us to see how this amazing story of kindness and surprising twists ends. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story. It's a deeply human journey about loss resilience and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances in the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now let's begin. What if a child with nothing gave everything to a stranger drowning in grief? That's the question that haunted the stormy night when 8-year-old Sophie Miller first met Mr. Thomas Caldwell, a man the world saw as untouchable, but who was in that moment utterly broken. The rain came down in heavy sheets, drumming against the foggy windows of Benny's diner like 1,000 tiny hammers. Thunder rolled across the Boston skyline, and every flash of lightning revealed the silhouette of a man slumped over a cold cup of coffee. Inside, the diner felt like a lonely island of flickering neon lights and empty booths. Most customers had long scurried home to escape the storm, but one small figure remained: Sophie, her blonde hair darkened by raindrops, her shoes patched with duct tape, and her eyes wide with a kind of kindness you don't often see. Sophie had been waiting for her mother, Monica, who was mopping the floor behind the counter. That night had been especially hard, tips were low, and the diner had been nearly empty all evening. But as Sophie watched the sad man in the corner, something stirred inside her. She saw not the expensive watch on his wrist or the fine wool of his suit, but the tears he tried so hard to hide. She picked up the small, crumpled $5 bill she'd been saving for new markers and walked slowly to his booth. "Sir, do you need someone to talk to?" Her voice was soft but carried a courage beyond her years. Thomas Caldwell looked up, startled, his red-rimmed eyes meeting hers. For a moment he couldn't speak. His mind flashed back to his daughter Lily, her giggles still echoing in his memory, even though it had been weeks since he'd last heard them. He took a shaky breath. I lost someone, and I don't know how to keep going." Sophie's eyes glistened with quiet understanding. She climbed into the booth across from him without asking, resting her chin on the table. "My daddy went to heaven when I was 5. Mommy says, when people look this sad, they need a friend." She fished into her tiny pocket, pulling out her $5 bill and sliding it across the table with trembling hands. "I'll buy your dinner. You shouldn't be alone." A tear rolled down Caldwell's cheek as he stared at her, offering a small fortune for a girl like her. He tried to push it back to her. "I can't take your money, sweetheart. Please." She insisted, her voice steady despite the thunder shaking the diner walls. "Mommy says helping people is more important than new shoes." Monica rushed over, breathless, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sophie, leave the man alone," she pleaded, her eyes darting nervously between her daughter and the stranger. But Caldwell held up a hand, his voice surprisingly gentle. "She's not bothering me." He looked at Monica, seeing exhaustion etched into every line of her face. It was a face he recognized, not literally, but the kind of face worn by every parent fighting battles their children never see. Outside, the storm intensified, lightning illuminating the diner's worn booths, the chipped tiles, the flickering jukebox that hadn't worked in years. It was the perfect backdrop for two strangers' worlds to collide. Caldwell told Sophie a little about Lily, how she loved to draw rainbows and believed every sad person needed a hug. His words were broken, punctuated by painful silences, Sophie listened intently, nodding like a wise old soul. "I think Lily would be proud you're here tonight," she whispered, and Caldwell felt something shift in his chest. Monica hovered close by, torn between wanting to protect her daughter and sensing something profoundly human unfolding before her. She watched Sophie pat Caldwell's hand gently and felt tears sting her eyes. Here was her child, who had so little offering everything she had to heal a stranger. For a moment, time seemed to freeze in that tiny diner as the storm raged on. The clinking of plates in the kitchen faded, the neon sign buzzed, and all that existed was the warmth of an impossible connection. It wasn't just the meeting of a child and a billionaire, it was the meeting of two hearts, broken in different ways, but finding solace in the same place. Sophie's innocent bravery cut through layers of grief that money had never been able to touch. The lesson here is simple, but powerful. The smallest gestures of love can pierce the deepest sorrow. A child's kindness can bring light to a soul lost in darkness. And sometimes the people who seem the weakest hold the power to change everything. The storm outside finally began to ease rain, slowing to a soft patter, as if the sky itself was exhaling after a long cry. Caldwell looked at Monica and Sophie and felt for the first time in weeks the faintest spark of hope flicker inside him. And as the diner's old clock ticked past midnight, it was clear to anyone watching that this night would not end like any other. For Caldwell, Sophie and Monica, it was only the beginning of a journey that would test their faith, reveal painful secrets, and force them to face choices that could shatter or heal them all. Because this chance encounter at Benny's diner wasn't just fate, it was the spark of something far bigger. And what came next would push them to their limits, bind them in unexpected ways, and set them on a collision course with a truth none of them were ready to face. As we step into the next chapter, we'll uncover the quiet battles Monica fights every day and how a mother's love can be both a shield and a burden when the world seems determined to break you. The morning after the storm dawn broke over Boston with pale light filtering through the cracked blinds of Trailer 14 at Beacon Hills Mobile Park. Inside, the tiny kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast and instant coffee. Monica Miller stood barefoot on the worn linoleum floor, staring at the stack of bills on the table. Her eyes lingered on a pink envelope from the property manager stamped with the words, "Final Notice." She traced the letters with a trembling finger before folding the envelope and tucking it behind the cookie jar, hoping Sophie wouldn't see. But she knew it was only a matter of time before the quiet world she'd built for her daughter would start to crumble. Beacon Hills wasn't the kind of place you saw on postcards. Rows of aging trailers lined narrow gravel roads, each with sagging steps, peeling paint, and small signs of hope. Plastic flowers in rusty cans, bicycles missing, tires, faded flags fluttering over patchy yards. It was a neighborhood of survivors, waitresses, janitors, single parents, all clinging to the same dream of something better. For Monica, every day was a tightrope walk between keeping Sophie fed and staying one step ahead of the next overdue bill. Monica's shifts at Benny's diner were long, but they were her lifeline. She'd mastered the art of stretching $1 second-hand clothes, dollar store groceries, skipping meals so Sophie could have enough. On nights she worked late, she'd tiptoe into Sophie's room just to watch her daughter sleep, cheeks flushed against the cold, breathing softly, clutching the threadbare stuffed bunny she'd named Mr. Whiskers. It was in those moments that Monica's heart swelled with love, and a terror so deep it made her chest ache because she knew how close they were to losing everything. Sophie, ever curious and observant, had started to notice the cracks in their world. At school, she'd begun lying to friends about why she couldn't go on field trips or buy the same sparkly backpacks they carried. She stopped asking for things. Monica caught her practicing "I don't mind" in the mirror, preparing to brush off the next birthday party invitation she couldn't attend. Once, Monica found Sophie with her shoes off, comparing the holes in her soles, to those of a classmate who had new sneakers. Sophie had whispered to herself, "It's okay. Mommy works hard, we're okay." Monica had to leave the room so her daughter wouldn't see her cry. The emotional weight on Monica's shoulders grew heavier with each day. She wore her exhaustion like an invisible cloak, hiding it behind polite smiles at the diner, the same way she hid her fears from Sophie. Her hands had become calloused, her back ached from hours of cleaning tables and hauling heavy trays. Still, she told herself she was lucky to have a job, lucky to have Sophie, lucky to have anything at all. But deep down, she knew luck had little to do with survival in a world that seemed rigged against people like her. One evening, after an especially grueling double shift, Monica sank into the thin mattress of her bed, the springs creaking beneath her. Sophie climbed up beside her, tucking herself under Monica's arm. They read from a library book until Sophie drifted to sleep, her soft breath warming Monica's collarbone. In the stillness, Monica whispered to the ceiling, as if the stars outside could hear, "Please let me keep her safe." Her voice cracked because she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep that promise. Beacon Hills. Mobile Park itself felt like it shared her fatigue. Leaking roofs, busted pipes, neighbors who'd given up fixing things because tomorrow always threatened something worse. But there were moments of beauty, too. Mrs. Rodriguez, from Trailer 19, bringing over soup when Monica was sick. Kids playing tag under the only working streetlight. The way people looked out for each other because nobody else would. These small kindnesses reminded Monica she wasn't entirely alone, but they were fleeting comforts in a reality that demanded relentless sacrifice. Adding to her worries was Sophie's recent quietness. Since the night at Benny's diner, Sophie had been lost in thought, eyes searching the horizon, as if expecting answers to fall from the sky. Monica couldn't bring herself to ask what Sophie was thinking, afraid the question would open a floodgate of fears she wasn't ready to face. And so they danced around each other, two hearts desperate to protect one another from truths that hurt too much to say out loud. The reality was Monica wasn't just afraid of poverty or eviction. She feared what losing their home would do to Sophie's spirit. She remembered how, after Sophie's father died in a construction accident, the bright spark in her daughter's eyes had dimmed for months. Only through bedtime stories, long walks in the park, and whispered reassurances had Monica coaxed that spark back to life. The thought of seeing it snuffed out again terrified her more than any notice taped to their door. One cold Saturday morning, Monica's fear took on a new shape when Sophie came home from school with tears in her eyes. She'd been teased about her clothes, and one boy had called her trailer trash. Monica's heart shattered as Sophie asked, "Mommy, are we poor?" The question stung more than any overdue bill. She gathered Sophie in her arms, rocking her gently. "We don't have much money, baby, but we are rich in love, and that's what matters most." The words felt small, but they were all Monica had to give. This is the fragile world Monica fought every day to preserve, a world where hope was a fragile thread woven through moments of quiet love and daily struggle. It was a life invisible to most, but to Monica and Sophie it was everything. Their story is not just about hardship, but about the quiet heroism of mothers who rise every day to face impossible odds for their children. And while Monica's sacrifices went unseen by the world, they were about to collide with the storm of secrets and decisions that Thomas Caldwell was carrying, choices that could either shatter Beacon Hills forever or bring a miracle neither of them dared to imagine. Thomas Caldwell had always believed he was a man in control. For decades, he had commanded boardrooms, steered billion-dollar deals, and built Caldwell Holdings into a financial empire. He wore tailored suits and spoke in measured tones, the kind of man who never let the world see his wounds. But everything changed after the night at Benny's diner. That evening, with Sophie had planted a seed of doubt in him, a question he couldn't shake: what good was all his power if it only destroyed lives like hers? Days after meeting Sophie, Caldwell sat in his office on the top floor of Caldwell Tower, the tallest building in downtown Boston. The walls of glass offered a sweeping view of the city, but he felt like he was staring out at a world he no longer recognized. He pulled up the file on Project Horizon, his company's flagship development plan. The words on the screen twisted his gut. Beacon Hill's redevelopment projected revenue, $300 million. In black and white clarity, it confirmed what he'd feared. Beacon Hill's mobile park wasn't just some property. It was Sophie and Monica's home, the place he'd watched them laugh and struggle. And he was the man set to wipe it off the map. The next morning, Caldwell called an emergency meeting with his executive team. The polished conference room buzzed with whispers as men and women in expensive suits gathered around the long mahogany table. Caldwell's right-hand man, Richard Blake, was already there, his smile sharp as a blade. "Mr. Caldwell, you called this meeting?" Blake asked smoothly, though his eyes flickered with impatience. "I did," Caldwell replied, his voice low. "I need everyone's honesty. If we go through with Project Horizon 127, families will lose their homes. Have we considered the human cost?" The room fell silent. Finally, Blake leaned forward, fingers steepled. "With respect, sir, it's not our job to solve everyone's problems. Our responsibility is to our shareholders." Caldwell's stomach churned. He thought of Sophie's bright eyes, her trembling hands offering him her only $5. He saw Monica's tired smile, her fierce love for her daughter. He realized then what he'd been too blind to see: the distance between his world and theirs wasn't measured in dollars, but in humanity. Blake continued, his tone growing colder. "You're letting personal feelings interfere with your obligations. Project Horizon will double our quarterly profits. That's the reality." The words stung. Caldwell knew Blake was right, at least by every standard he'd been taught, but something inside him rebelled. His daughter Lily had once told him, "Daddy, don't let money make you mean." That memory hit him like a punch to the chest. Later that night, unable to sleep, Caldwell drove aimlessly through the city until he found himself parked outside Beacon Hill's mobile park. He sat in the shadows watching the lights flicker in the trailers, the distant laughter of children who hadn't yet learned to fear the world. He saw Monica's silhouette moving through her kitchen, Sophie curled up on the couch reading a book. It was a snapshot of love he'd lost with Lily, and it took his breath away. He thought of the day he held Lily's tiny hand in the hospital, promising he'd make the world a better place for children like her. Yet, here he was, ready to bulldoze a neighborhood full of kids who deserved more than fear and eviction notices. The realization was a knife twisting in his heart. He returned to the office the next day, determined to change course. But as he walked through the sleek glass doors, Blake was waiting for him, a smug look on his face. "I've already spoken with the board," Blake said casually. "They're aware you might be having second thoughts. I took the liberty of preparing a press release announcing Project Horizon's groundbreaking next month." Caldwell felt the walls close in. He saw the trap for what it was. Blake was orchestrating a coup, using his hesitation to paint him as weak. If Caldwell resisted, he could lose control of the company he'd built from nothing. But if he gave in, he would betray the only people who had given him a reason to keep living. He called an old friend in the city planning office, desperate for alternatives. "Is there any other site we could use?" he asked, voice strained. "Somewhere that wouldn't uproot families." "Nothing, with the same zoning approvals," the friend replied sadly. "Beacon Hills is uniquely valuable. That's why developers have fought over it for years." For the first time in his life, Caldwell felt powerless. He spent the evening pacing the halls of his empty penthouse, his footsteps echoing off marble floors that suddenly felt as cold as a tomb. Memories of Lily were everywhere, the piano she never finished learning, the dollhouse she used to play with alone because her father was always busy. His heart ached with regret. He realized then that wealth had insulated him from seeing how fragile other people's lives could be. His fortune had once seemed like a shield against pain, but now it felt like a prison built of his own making. A late-night phone call from Blake confirmed his worst fears. "The board has scheduled a vote of no confidence." Blake said, his tone almost gleeful. "If you don't proceed with Project Horizon, they'll remove you as CEO." This was the line in the sand: keep his empire or keep his soul. The lesson for anyone listening is stark but true. The greatest tragedy isn't losing what you love, but realizing too late that you were the cause of someone else's suffering. Caldwell finally understood the weight of his choices, and that understanding came with a cost he might not survive paying. As dawn broke over Boston, Caldwell knew he couldn't turn back. But what he would do next could either save Sophie and Monica or destroy everything they'd come to mean to him. On a gray afternoon, heavy with the threat of rain, Monica was balancing a tray of steaming plates at Benny's diner when the small television mounted above the counter caught her eye. A news anchor was reporting live from Caldwell Holdings headquarters. Behind him, a massive banner read, "Project Horizon, Transforming Boston's Skyline." The camera zoomed in on Thomas Caldwell, flanked by Richard Blake, both men smiling as they shook hands with city officials. Monica's breath caught in her throat as the reporter's words sank in. Project Horizon, spearheaded by Caldwell Holdings, will redevelop Beacon Hills Mobile Park, replacing it with luxury condos and retail space. The tray slipped from Monica's hands, crashing to the floor in a shower of broken plates and splattering soup. The diner fell silent as every eye turned to her, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Thomas Caldwell, the man she'd begun to trust, the man who had shared tears with her daughter, was the same man set to destroy their home. In that moment, everything shifted. The warmth of his kindness felt like a cruel trick, and the hope she'd dared to feel for a better future turned to ash. Sophie, sitting at the counter coloring, looked up at her mother with wide, confused eyes. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Monica knelt beside her, voice trembling. "Sweetheart, we need to go home now." She couldn't bear to tell Sophie the truth in that moment. She could barely process it herself. That evening, Beacon Hills Mobile Park buzzed with rumors. Neighbors gathered in hushed circles under flickering streetlights, sharing what they'd seen on the news. Fear spread like wildfire. Mothers clutched babies tighter. Fathers stared helplessly at the homes they'd spent years piecing together. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd lived there for 25 years, wept openly as she remembered raising her grandchildren in the same trailer Caldwell's project would soon demolish. As Monica packed a bag for Sophie, just in case a knock came at the door. It was Caldwell, his face-pale eyes haunted. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited, the weight of his betrayal hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Monica's hands shook as she held the zipper of Sophie's backpack. "How long?" she asked quietly, her voice cold. "How long have you known you were going to take our home?" Caldwell's voice cracked. "Since before I met you. But I swear I never meant—" She cut him off with a sob so raw it made Sophie flinch. "You knew, Thomas. You sat at my table, you laughed with my daughter, and all the while you planned to rip this place away from us." Sophie ran to Caldwell, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mr. Thomas, you said we'd always be friends. Why are you taking our home?" Her voice was so small, so full of betrayal, that it shattered what little composure Caldwell had left. He sank to his knees, trying to take Sophie's hands, but Monica pulled her daughter back. "I believed you," Monica whispered, eyes blazing through her tears. "I thought you were different." Outside, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the raised voices. Neighbors, who had once waved at Caldwell, now stared with anger and disbelief. Richard Blake appeared at the edge of the group, his smirk visible even in the dim light. "I warned you, Thomas," he called out loudly, ensuring everyone heard. "You can't mix personal feelings with business." The words were gasoline on a fire. People began shouting, some cursing Caldwell's name, others sobbing in fear. Caldwell tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the swell of rage and heartbreak. He saw the faces of people he'd come to care for now twisted with betrayal. The very community he wanted to protect was crumbling before his eyes, and he was the reason. In that chaos, Sophie slipped from her mother's grip, running into the night. Monica screamed her daughter's name, but Sophie was already gone, disappearing into the maze of trailers. Panic seized Monica as she and Caldwell sprinted after her, calling out desperately. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke rain, pounding the metal roofs like drumbeats of doom. Sophie's small form darted between trailers, terrified and alone, as thunder rolled above. Caldwell found her huddled near the playground at the far end of the park, soaked to the skin, hugging Mr. Whiskers for dear life. He scooped her into his arms, his tears mixing with the rain. "I'm so sorry, Sophie," he whispered, voice raw with anguish. "I never wanted to hurt you." Monica reached them seconds later, collapsing beside Caldwell as she took her daughter into her arms. The three of them sat there in the mud, clinging to each other as the storm raged around them. Neighbors emerged from their trailers, umbrellas forgotten, drawn by the sight of the woman and child holding the man who had become both their hope and their greatest fear. That night something shifted in Beacon Hills. The community that had always felt powerless found its voice. They gathered in the community center, sharing stories of love, struggle, and resilience. They realized they were stronger together than apart. They decided to fight not just for their homes, but for the dignity of people like Monica and the innocence of children like Sophie. For anyone listening, the lesson is clear: secrets rot, the foundations of trust, but truth, even when painful, can bring people together. Caldwell understood then that the only way to earn forgiveness was to stop hiding and start fighting for the community he'd nearly destroyed. Through tears and determination, Monica, Sophie, and their neighbors prepared for a battle they never thought they'd face, one that would decide not just the fate of their homes, but the meaning of family loyalty and love. The storm that had shaken Beacon Hills Mobile Park finally passed, leaving the trailers glistening under a sky the color of pewter. For Thomas Caldwell, the silence that followed was louder than any thunderclap. He spent the next day locked in his office, staring at the deed for the mobile park. Each line of legal text felt like a chain around his heart. He knew what he had to do, but fear whispered that it was already too late to make things right. Meanwhile, Sophie sat at her small desk, scribbling crayon drawings of stick figures holding hands under rainbows. Her world had shifted overnight. The man she thought of as a friend had nearly become the villain who would take away everything. Yet, in the innocent wisdom only children seemed to possess, she still believed Caldwell could be good. When Monica asked why she kept drawing him, Sophie simply said, "Because he's sad, Mommy. And people who are sad need more love, not less." That evening, Caldwell gathered the residents of Beacon Hills in the community center. The air was tense with suspicion and hurt, but he stood before them unguarded and raw. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I've spent my life building things, but somewhere along the way I forgot that people matter more than buildings. I came here tonight to tell you that Beacon Hills is no longer for sale. I bought the land personally this morning, and I'm transferring ownership to a trust managed by the residents. Your homes are yours forever." There was a stunned silence before a single voice, Mrs. Rodriguez's, broke through. "You'd do that after everything." Her voice cracked with disbelief. Caldwell nodded, tears welling in his eyes. It's the least I can do. Sophie reminded me what it means to care. Monica stepped forward, clutching Sophie's hand. Her eyes glistened as she looked at Caldwell. Why, she asked softly, her words carrying the weight of every sleepless night and broken dream. Caldwell's voice broke. Because a little girl with duct-taped shoes showed me what true wealth is. And because I never want to hurt her or anyone again. Richard Blake, who had slunk into the back of the room hoping to salvage his plans, stood frozen. He knew his scheme was crumbling. Caldwell faced him, voice steady. "Your time here is over, Blake. You've forgotten what this company stands for." The room erupted in cheers as security escorted Blake out a fitting end for the man who had tried to profit from others' suffering. Tears streamed down Monica's face as she hugged Sophie, who turned to Caldwell and beamed. "See, I told you, helping people makes your heart better." Her words sent a ripple of emotion through the crowd. Parents scooped up their children, neighbors embraced, and strangers offered handshakes that felt like lifelines. The next morning, Beacon Hills was transformed. Instead of fear and uncertainty, there was laughter as families worked side by side repainting fences and fixing roofs. Caldwell rolled up his sleeves and hammered nails, sweating and smiling beside the very people he had once endangered. When Sophie handed him a new drawing, this time of their community safe and bright, he framed it in his office, vowing never to forget what really mattered. That night, Monica cooked a simple meal of spaghetti and garlic bread, inviting Caldwell to share it in their modest kitchen. They talked about dreams and regrets, about Lily and Sophie, about the kind of world they wanted to build. The conversation flowed easily, filling spaces that once held only silence and sadness. When Sophie crawled into Caldwell's lap, resting her head on his chest, Monica reached across the table and took his hand. In that quiet moment, they were not a billionaire and a struggling mother. They were a family in the making. Outside, neighbors gathered under strings of lights hung between trailers, music playing softly as children chased each other through puddles. Caldwell looked out over the community he'd nearly destroyed, but had now saved, and he felt something he hadn't in years: peace. For anyone listening, the lesson is simple yet profound. No amount of money or power can replace the love and trust of those around you, and sometimes the smallest hands can lead the way to the biggest changes. Sophie, in her innocence, had done what no boardroom negotiation or business strategy ever could. She'd reminded everyone that compassion is the greatest legacy we can leave behind. As the stars broke through the clouds above Beacon Hills, Caldwell whispered a silent thank you to the little girl who saved him, and to a community that had taught him it's never too late to choose kindness over greed. When the storm first drove Thomas Caldwell and Sophie Miller together in Benny's diner, it seemed like nothing more than a chance encounter, a grieving billionaire drowning in sorrow, and a kind-hearted 8-year-old girl with barely 2 coins to her name. But from that rainy night, a journey began that transformed not just their lives, but an entire community. Caldwell, trapped in a prison of his own wealth and guilt, learned to see the world through Sophie's eyes, where people matter more than profits, and where helping others is worth more than any bank balance. He watched Monica Miller fight tirelessly to protect her daughter, sacrificing sleep, comfort, and her own dreams just to give Sophie a sense of safety. He discovered the quiet courage it takes to face each day with nothing but hope and love as your armor. As Caldwell's dilemma unfolded, the story revealed how the very power that made him untouchable also made him blind to the pain his decisions could cause. It took a child's innocence to pierce the walls he'd built around his heart, forcing him to question everything he stood for. Sophie's unwavering belief in kindness pushed Caldwell to confront the dark side of his empire, a project that would have left hundreds homeless, including the little girl who reminded him of his own lost daughter. It was only when Caldwell chose to risk his legacy to stand up to his scheming second-in-command Richard Blake that redemption became possible. The transformation didn't happen with grand speeches or heroic battles. It came through quiet moments, Sophie offering her $5 bill Monica's tears, as she tried to shield her daughter Caldwell kneeling in the mud, clutching Sophie after she ran away. It was these raw human connections that ultimately led Caldwell to buy Beacon Hills Mobile Park and gift it back to the families who had every reason to hate him. In doing so, he saved more than homes. He saved himself from a life of empty victories. This story is a powerful reminder that no one is beyond redemption, that it is never too late to choose compassion over convenience, and that the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples large enough to change lives. It shows us that true strength doesn't come from how much you control, but how much you care and how willing you are to sacrifice for the good of others. Sophie's childlike wisdom taught an entire community and each of us that sometimes the richest people are those who give the most love. The moral lesson we can all take away is that patience, forgiveness, and empathy are stronger than anger or greed. Being willing to look past our own pain to see someone else's struggles can heal wounds deeper than we realize. By practicing compassion daily, listening without judgment, offering a helping hand, or simply choosing kindness, we can build stronger families, communities, and a better world. Thank you so much for watching this story and spending your precious time with us today. If this tale of love loss and redemption touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss more inspiring stories like this one. Your support means everything and gives us the motivation to keep sharing powerful tales that remind us all what truly matters in life.